I'd been working at the Moonrise Animal Sanctuary for 3 years when everything went sideways. 3 years of tending wounded hawks and orphaned bear cubs in the remote Colorado mountains. 3 years of keeping my head down and my past buried where it belonged. The work suited me. Always had, really. Something about broken things needing time and patience to heal again. I understood that better than most folks. My cabin sat right on the edge of the facility, close enough to hear if any of the animals got restless during the night, but far enough from the main buildings to give me the space I needed. Evenings, I'd sit on my little porch with a cup of coffee and my rehabilitation notes, cataloging which animals were ready for release and which ones needed more time. The howls started around sunset most nights. They'd echo through the pine forests, rolling down from the peaks like some ancient conversation I wasn't meant to understand. Used to make my skin crawl when I first moved here. Too much like home, too much like the pack dynamics I'd left behind. But after 3 years, they'd become background noise. Just another sound of the wilderness, like wind through the trees or the creek running behind my cabin. I was 26 and finally had something resembling peace. Took me long enough to find it. See, being Omega in most werewolf territories means you're either property or a problem, sometimes both. The kind of status that makes alphas think they own you and betas treat you like you're fragile as spun glass. I'd learned early that keeping to myself was easier than explaining why I didn't fit their neat little categories. But here I had creatures that couldn't judge me for what I was. A red-tailed hawk didn't care about pack hierarchy when its wing was busted. An injured deer didn't smell my Omega status and decide I was weak. They just needed help, and I knew how to give it. The sanctuary's isolation suited me perfectly. We were 40 minutes from the nearest town, accessible only by a winding dirt road that most folks avoided unless they had business with us. The kind of place where you could disappear if you needed to, where your past didn't follow you up the mountain. Alice Salinas ran the place, and she was exactly the kind of supervisor I needed. Professional, competent, and blessed with the rare gift of minding her own business. She'd hired me based on my veterinary training and my references from the Wildlife Center in Wyoming. Never asked why someone with my qualifications wanted to work in the middle of nowhere for half the pay I could have gotten in Denver. First day, she'd shown me around the facility, the main veterinary building, the flight cages for raptors, the recovery pens for mammals, the release areas where we'd turn animals back to the wild when they were ready. Then she'd walked me to my cabin and said, "Your business is your business, Winter. You do good work with the animals, and we won't have problems." 3 years later, we never had. Alice respected my need for solitude in ways I hadn't expected. She'd schedule my shifts so I worked alone most of the time, handling the evening rounds and overnight emergencies. She never pushed when I declined invitations to join her in town for supplies or dinner, just accepted that I preferred my own company and let me be. The work felt meaningful in ways I hadn't experienced before. There's something about nursing a wounded animal back to health, watching it grow strong enough to reclaim its wildlife, that hits different than regular veterinary practice. These weren't pets dependent on humans for survival. They were wild creatures getting a second chance at the life they were meant to live. I understood that intimately. Every successful release felt like proof that broken things could heal. That being cast out didn't mean being worthless. That sometimes starting over in a new place was exactly what you needed to become who you were supposed to be. I'd released 43 animals during my time at Moonrise, kept count in a notebook with dates and species and notes about their recovery. 43 creatures that had been given up for lost until they found their way to us. The routine was simple, predictable. Morning rounds to check on overnight patients, afternoon treatments and feeding schedules, evening documentation and final checks before dark. Day after day, season after season, with the steady rhythm of animals healing and moving on. Everything changed the night I found the injured wolf during my final rounds. It was late October, one of those crisp mountain evenings, when the air carries the promise of snow and the aspens have turned gold against the darkening sky. I'd finished my documentation early and decided to do one last check on the outdoor recovery pens before heading back to my cabin. The moon was nearly full, casting long shadows through the pine trees as I walked the familiar paths between enclosures. I had my flashlight, but didn't need it yet. The moonlight was bright enough to see clearly, turning everything silver and strange. I was checking the latch on the bear enclosure when I heard it. A low whine, barely audible, coming from the direction of the tree line. Not the sound of any animal we had in residence. Something new. Something hurt. I followed the sound deeper into the woods, my flashlight beam sweeping across fallen logs and granite outcroppings. The whining got stronger as I moved uphill, more desperate. Whatever was making that noise was in serious trouble. I found him collapsed beside a lightning-struck pine, about 50 yards from our property line. Even in the moonlight, I could see he was massive. Easily 120 pounds of gray and black fur. And definitely male, though that wasn't what made me freeze in my tracks. It was the fact that he wasn't entirely wolf. The security lights had just kicked on, casting those harsh white pools across the gravel near the main gate. I'd been checking the perimeter fence. We'd had problems with coyotes getting too bold lately. When I caught the scent first, blood and infection, thick and metallic in the cold air. But underneath that, something else. Something that made the hair on my arms stand up. He was maybe 20 feet from the gate, collapsed on his side in a patch of scrub grass. Even from a distance, I could see the tremors running through his massive frame. Fever shakes. I'd seen them plenty in the animals we treated, but never in something this size. Jesus, he was huge. I approached slow, the way you do with any injured predator. My boots crunched on the frost-brittle grass. The closer I got, the more my chest tightened. This wasn't just big for a wolf. This was big for anything. Easily 120 pounds, maybe more. Gray and black fur, matted with dirt and dried blood. His ribs showed through his coat, but the muscle underneath was still substantial, still dangerous. But it was the other thing that made me freeze 3 feet away from him. The presence. Even unconscious, even burning up with fever, he radiated something that hit me like a physical weight. Authority, dominance. The kind that made every instinct I'd spent 3 years burying rise up and demand I drop my eyes. Submit. My wolf, the part of me I kept locked down tight, wanted to crawl on her belly and whine. I forced myself to breathe, to think like the wildlife tech I was supposed to be, not the Omega I'd been running from. Okay, I whispered to myself, just an injured animal, that's all. Except when I crouched down to get a better look at his wounds, his eyes cracked open. Amber. Bright amber like honey held up to sunlight, and looking right at me with an intelligence that made my stomach drop. Not a wolf, not entirely. The eyes focused on my face for maybe 3 seconds, long enough for me to see the awareness there, the calculation even through the haze of fever. Then they rolled back and his lids fluttered shut again. His breathing stayed shallow and rapid. I sat back on my heels, mind racing. Shifter. Had to be. The size alone should have told me, but those eyes confirmed it. And if the presence I'd felt was any indication, not just any shifter. An alpha, a strong one. Which meant I should have been on my radio to Alice immediately. Protocol was clear. Any unusual wildlife situations got reported to the supervisor right away, especially anything that might be more than it appeared. But I didn't reach for my radio. Instead, I found myself studying him closer. The way his massive paws were torn and bloody, like he'd traveled a long way over rough ground. The infected gash along his left flank that was definitely more than a few days old. The way he'd positioned himself, not hidden but visible from the gate, like he'd wanted to be found. He'd dragged himself here, to us, to the sanctuary. That changed things. I'd spent enough time with wounded animals to recognize desperation when I saw it. The way they'd show up at the edges of human settlement when they had nowhere else to go. When their bodies were failing and their options had run out. This felt like that. Beneath all that alpha dominance, beneath the power that still made my wolf want to submit, was something raw and vulnerable. Something that needed help. Alice would ask questions I couldn't answer. She'd want to know how I'd identified him as a shifter so quickly. She'd want to call it into the authorities, maybe fish and wildlife. There'd be paperwork and investigations and attention I couldn't afford. But more than that, they'd move him, take him somewhere else. And looking at the condition he was in, I wasn't sure he'd survive another transfer. Shit, I muttered, then made my decision. The isolation ward was on the far side of the main building, away from the general treatment areas where the other techs worked their shifts. It had its own entrance and climate control system, originally built for quarantining animals with potential diseases, but we hadn't used it in months. Perfect for keeping someone out of sight. Getting him there was the tricky part. I jogged back to the equipment shed and grabbed one of the large transport stretchers we use for the bigger animals, the kind with reinforced sides and locking wheels. It took me 3 tries to get him positioned right. Dead weight was always harder than you expected, and he was solid muscle despite the weight he'd lost. My back was screaming by the time I got him loaded, but the stretcher's wheels made the actual transport manageable. The isolation ward smelled like disinfectant and old concrete. I got him transferred to one of the larger enclosures, more of a small room really, with smooth walls and a drain in the floor. The kind of setup designed for animals that might be unpredictable when they woke up. Only then did I let myself really examine him. The fever was the immediate problem. His nose was dry and hot, his gums pale, dehydration too, from the way his skin tented when I pinched it. The infected wound on his flank would need cleaning and antibiotics, but the fever had to come down first, or nothing else would matter. I started an IV line, harder on a wolf than on the dogs and cats I was used to, but the principle was the same. Saline solution to address the dehydration, something for the fever, antibiotics for the infection. Basic stabilization protocol, same as I do for any large mammal in similar condition. Except most large mammals didn't make me feel like I was standing too close to a lightning rod. Even unconscious, even weakened by illness, his presence filled the small room, made the air feel charged, made my hands shake slightly as I worked. Though whether from nerves or something deeper, I couldn't say. I stayed. Alice had left at 6, and the overnight tech wouldn't be in until morning. That gave me roughly 12 hours to get his condition stable enough that he might survive whatever came next. 12 hours to figure out what the hell I was going to tell people when they started asking questions. I pulled a chair up next to his enclosure and settled in to monitor his vitals. The fever broke around 3 in the morning. I'd been dozing in the chair when his breathing changed, deeper, more regular. When I checked his temperature, it had dropped nearly 2 degrees, still high but trending in the right direction. By dawn, his eyes were tracking movement when I walked around the enclosure, still clouded with illness but aware, alert. I'd barely left his side for more than a few minutes at a time. Hadn't even thought about going home, about the questions that would raise if Alice noticed I'd stayed all night. All I could focus on was keeping him stable, keeping him breathing, keeping him alive until his body could start fighting back on its own. Because whatever else he was, alpha, shifter, potential threat, he'd come to us for help, and I'd be damned if I was going to let him die on my watch. The next 3 days blurred together like they always did when I had a critical patient. Sleep became something I grabbed in 20-minute stretches on the cot. Alice kept in the supply room. Food turned into whatever protein bars I could stuff in my mouth between checking vitals and changing bandages. The world narrowed down to that single enclosure, to monitoring breathing patterns and tracking fever spikes. The wolf, because I still thought of him as just a wolf then, despite knowing better, stayed locked in that space between life and death. His temperature spiked and dropped like a broken thermostat. 1 hour I'd find him burning up, tongue lolling, panting even in unconsciousness. The next, he'd be shivering so hard the whole cage rattled. Whatever had gotten into his system, it wasn't playing by normal rules. I'd dealt with plenty of poisonings before. Antifreeze, rat poison, the occasional idiot who thought chocolate was fine for dogs. This felt different, deeper, like something was eating him from the inside out. And all I could do was keep throwing treatments at the wall and hope something stuck. "Come on," I'd mutter, checking his pulse for the 100th time that day. "You didn't drag yourself all the way here just to give up now." His heart would skip, then settle back into that irregular rhythm that made my stomach clench every time. By the second night, I'd started talking to him. Not unusual, really. I talked to all my patients, helped me think through treatment options, and some of the research suggested animals responded to familiar voices. But this felt different, more like I was trying to keep him tethered to something. "So here's what I'm thinking," I said. adjusting his IV drip around midnight. The sanctuary was dead quiet, except for the soft hum of equipment and the distant hoot of an owl somewhere in the trees. Your white cell count is all over the place, but it's trending upward. That's good. Means your body's starting to fight back. His ear twitched. Could have been a reflex, but I chose to take it as encouragement. The fever's the real problem. 104 is dangerous territory for most mammals, and you've been riding that line for 36 hours. I checked the cooling mat under him, made sure the fans were still circulating air properly. But you're built different, aren't you? Bigger heart, denser muscle mass. Maybe that's buying us time. I pulled up the plastic chair I'd dragged in from the break room and settled in for another long watch. His breathing was shallow but steady, better than the ragged gasping from this morning. This place used to be a hunting lodge, I found myself saying, back in the 1950s. Rich guys from Denver would come up here to shoot elk and pretend they were roughing it. Alice's grandfather bought it in the 80s, converted the whole thing. The wolf's head shifted slightly, still unconscious, but some part of him was listening. We get about 200 animals a year through here, hawks mostly, some bears when they get into trouble with campers. Last month, I had a mountain lion with a broken leg. Meanest patient I've ever worked with. Took 3 of us just to sedate him for x-rays. I leaned back in the chair, watching his chest rise and fall. But you? You've been nothing but cooperative. Even half dead, you haven't tried to bite anyone. That says something about character. His breathing deepened. Not much, but enough that I noticed. Of course, Alice thinks I'm crazy for talking to unconscious patients. Says animals don't understand complex language anyway. I adjusted his blanket, checked the IV site for swelling. But I think you understand more than most people give you credit for. That's when I noticed it, the way his breathing would settle whenever I spoke. Not dramatic, just a slight evening out of the rhythm, like my voice was some kind of anchor, pulling him back from wherever he'd been drifting. So I kept talking. I told him about the red-tailed hawk I'd nursed back to health last spring, how she'd refused to eat for the first week until I started feeding her by hand. About the orphaned bear cubs we'd raised 2 summers ago, how they'd follow me around like oversized puppies until we finally had to relocate them. I described the sanctuary's mission, how we weren't just patching up injuries, but giving wild things a second chance. How every animal that walked back into those mountains carried a piece of hope with them. That's what this place is really about, I said during one of those long pre-dawn hours when time moves like honey. Second chances. Fresh starts. Sometimes that's all any of us need. Dawn was creeping through the windows when I heard Alice's truck crunching up the gravel drive. Time to face another day, pretend I hadn't spent the last 72 hours living on coffee and stubbornness. I was checking his water bowl one last time when I heard the soft rustle of movement behind me. When I turned around, the wolf was gone. In his place lay a man. The sight hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd known this moment would come. Knowing something intellectually and seeing it with your own eyes are 2 different animals entirely. He was magnificent. Tall, easily 6 feet 3 inches even lying down. Shoulders that belonged on a linebacker. Arms corded with muscle that spoke of hard work and harder training. His hair was dark brown, cut short and practical. Sharp jawline, high cheekbones, skin tanned from outdoor work. But it was his eyes that stopped my breath. Amber, pure amber, like honey held up to sunlight. The same eyes that had studied me from the wolf's face, but now set in features that were entirely, devastatingly human. He was watching me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. Not hostile exactly, but calculating. Like I was a puzzle he needed to solve before he could decide what to do with me. I stood there frozen, water bowl still in my hands, trying to process what I was seeing. The blanket had shifted during his transformation, covering him from the waist down, but leaving that powerful chest exposed. No visible injuries now. The wounds that had been weeping infection yesterday were nothing but faint pink lines. Accelerated healing. Another piece of the shifter puzzle clicking into place. When he spoke, his voice hit me like a physical force. Why did you help me? The words carried weight beyond their simple meaning. This wasn't casual curiosity. This was authority, command, the kind of voice that expected immediate answers and got them. I set the water bowl down carefully, buying myself time to think. My hands wanted to shake, but I kept them steady through sheer force of will. You were hurt, I said simply. That's what we do here. His eyes narrowed slightly. You could have called the authorities, reported an unauthorized shifter in your territory. Instead, you've been caring for me for 3 days. The way he said it, like he'd been conscious, listening, filing away every word I'd spoken during those long night watches. Heat crept up my neck as I thought about everything I'd shared with him. All those rambling stories I thought were falling on deaf ears. I don't know what you think you heard. I heard everything. His voice was quieter now, but no less commanding. Every treatment explanation, every story about rescued animals, every word about second chances and fresh starts. He shifted slightly, and I caught the flash of something around his neck, a pendant of some kind, dark metal that caught the early morning light. My name is Kyle Salazar, he said, and the name hit me like cold water. Alpha of the Northern Ridge Pack. Alpha. Of course he was. I should have seen it from the beginning. The size, the presence, the way he'd commanded attention, even unconscious. But hearing it spoken aloud made everything shift into sharper focus. Northern Ridge Pack. I'd heard whispers about them, rumors that filtered down through the shifter grapevine, even to someone like me who tried to stay off the radar. Powerful, territorial, the kind of pack that didn't tolerate trespassers or interference. Kyle's amber eyes never left my face. So I'll ask you again, Wintermore, why did you help me instead of reporting my presence to whoever you answer to? The fact that he knew my name shouldn't have surprised me. Alice had probably mentioned it, or maybe he'd overheard it during one of her visits. But the way he said it, like he'd been thinking about it, studying it, made something flutter in my chest. I met his gaze directly, drawing on every ounce of backbone I'd developed over 3 years of dealing with wounded predators. Because that's not who I am, I said, and because you needed help. I should have known better than to think a simple answer would satisfy him. Kyle's amber eyes never left my face while I explained about the sanctuary, how we took in everything from injured raptors to orphaned mammals, how our mission was helping anything that needed it, no questions asked. The whole spiel Alice had me memorize when I first started working here. His expression stayed flat, skeptical. Neutral territory, he said. Not a question. We don't get involved in pack politics. I adjusted his bandages, checking for fresh bleeding. The wounds were healing faster than they should have been, even for a shifter. Alpha genetics, probably. Animals don't care about territorial disputes. But you do. My hand stilled on the gauze. What's that supposed to mean? You smell like you've been running for a long time. The observation hit like a physical blow. I forced myself to keep working, taping down the edge of the bandage with steady fingers. 3 years of practice keeping my expression neutral when people got too close to uncomfortable truths. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do. Kyle shifted on the examination table, wincing slightly. Nobody ends up this isolated by accident, especially not an Omega. There it was, the word I'd hoped he wouldn't use. I stepped back from the table, putting distance between us. How do you... Your scent. His voice stayed matter-of-fact. Faint, but it's there under all the antiseptic and animal musk. You're trying to mask it. My chest tightened. 3 years of careful isolation. 3 years of avoiding exactly this kind of discovery, and he'd figured it out in 3 days. Most people don't notice. I crossed my arms, suddenly aware of how exposed I felt in the small medical room. I've gotten good at hiding it. Most people aren't alphas. The way he said it made my skin prickle. Not threatening exactly. More like he was stating a fact that changed everything between us. So what's your story? Kyle leaned forward slightly, his amber eyes intense. Omega living alone in the middle of nowhere. No pack scent on you at all. That's not normal. Normal's overrated. It's also safer. His voice carried an edge now. Omegas without pack protection don't usually last long out here. I bristled at the implication. I've been doing just fine. Have you? He gestured around the small medical facility. This is hiding, not living. It's surviving. The words came out sharper than I intended. which is more than a lot of Omegas get to do. Something shifted in his expression. The skepticism softened into something more complex. Curiosity mixed with what looked almost like protectiveness. That made my stomach twist in ways I didn't want to examine. What pack were you born into? None of your business. Winter. The way he said my name made me look at him directly. I'm not asking to cause trouble. I'm asking because I need to know if you're safe here. Safe from what? From whoever you're running from. The certainty in his voice made my throat close up. I turned away, busying myself with organizing the medical supplies that were already perfectly organized. I'm not running from anyone. Right. Kyle's tone stayed neutral, but I could feel him watching me. You just happened to end up in one of the most isolated wildlife sanctuaries in Colorado because you love the scenery. I love the work. I'm sure you do, he paused. But that's not why you're here. I spun around to face him. You want to know why I'm here? Fine. Because I don't have anywhere else to go. Because being born Omega in the wrong pack means you either submit completely or you disappear. And I chose to disappear. The words hung between us like a challenge. Kyle's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes deepened. What pack? Doesn't matter. They're not looking for me anymore. I hoped that was still true. I've been off their radar for 3 years. Pack-born Omegas don't just vanish without consequences. They do if everyone thinks they're dead. Kyle went very still. Thinks they're dead. I'd said too much. Way too much. But something about his steady presence, the way he wasn't recoiling or making demands, made the truth want to spill out. There was an accident, a fire. I kept my voice clinical, detached. Official story is that I died in it along with 2 other pack members. Unofficial story is that I made sure it looked that way. Smart. The approval in his voice caught me off guard. Most alphas would have demanded details, or worse, started calculating how they could use the information. Kyle just nodded like he understood the necessity of it. So you've been Winter Moore for 3 years. It's my real name, just not the one I was born with. And Alice doesn't know. Alice doesn't ask questions she doesn't want answers to. I checked the wall clock. Still another hour before she'd arrive for her morning shift. She hired me based on my veterinary skills, not my background. Kyle was quiet for a long moment, studying me with those intense amber eyes. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. For what it's worth, I think you made the right choice. I blinked. You do? Freedom's worth more than pack security, especially when that security comes with chains. The understanding in his tone made my chest tighten in a different way, like recognition, like maybe he knew something about chains too. Your turn, I said. What brought you here? Really? Kyle's jaw tightened. Like I said, territorial dispute. That's not the whole truth. No, it's not. He met my gaze directly. Someone tried to poison me. Silver-laced compound designed specifically for alphas. Should have killed me within hours. My blood went cold. Silver poisoning was banned by every major pack treaty. Using it meant someone wanted him not just dead, but suffering first. Who? That's the question, isn't it? Kyle's expression hardened. Could be any of 3 different packs trying to move into our territory. Could be someone within my own pack making a play for leadership. You're an alpha leader. Pack alpha, yeah. He said it without arrogance, just stating fact, which makes me a target. I absorbed that information, trying to reconcile the vulnerable patient I'd been treating with the idea of him commanding a pack. It fit, though, the way he carried himself, the unconscious authority in his voice. How did you know to come here? Rumors. There's talk about a healer who works in neutral territory, someone who helps shifters without getting involved in politics. Kyle's eyes found mine. Someone who asks no questions and keeps secrets. Those rumors aren't wrong. I figured that out when you didn't immediately call the local pack to report a trespasser. We don't have a local pack. This territory's been unclaimed for decades. I know. Kyle leaned back against the wall. That's part of why I came here. Neutral ground, skilled healer, no political complications. Except now you know I'm a runaway Omega with a fake identity. And you know I'm a pack alpha with enemies who want me dead. He shrugged. Seems like we're even. The sound of gravel crunching outside made us both freeze. Alice's truck, right on schedule. She can't know what you are, I said quickly. Or what I am. If she finds out I've been lying about my background, she won't. Kyle's voice carried absolute certainty. What's the story? My mind raced. Wildlife researcher. You're tracking wolf movement patterns in the area and got injured in a fall while hiking. Simple enough. Can you sell it? Kyle's expression shifted, the intensity fading into something more academic, more harmless. The transformation was startling, from dangerous pack alpha to mild-mannered scientist in seconds. I've had practice with cover stories. The truck door slammed outside. Alice's footsteps on the gravel, steady and purposeful. Just follow my lead, I whispered. The main door opened with its familiar squeak. Alice's voice echoed from the front office. Winter, you here early again? In the medical room, I called back. We have a patient. Footsteps approached down the hallway. Alice appeared in the doorway, coffee mug in hand, wire-rimmed glasses slightly fogged from the morning cold. Another injured animal. Her gaze landed on Kyle, taking in his size and obvious human characteristics. Oh. Alice, this is Kyle. I kept my voice steady, professional. He's a wildlife researcher studying wolf behavior in the area. Had a hiking accident yesterday and needed medical attention. Alice's expression softened with concern. Are you all right? Much better, thanks to Winter's care. Kyle's voice had shifted completely, warmer, more deferential. The commanding presence was completely hidden. She's an excellent medic. She is. Alice moved closer, her trained eye assessing his visible bandages. What kind of accident? Took a bad fall near the North Ridge. Some loose shale gave way. Kyle delivered the lie smoothly, adding just enough detail to make it believable. Cut myself up pretty good on the rocks. The North Ridge is treacherous this time of year. Alice nodded sympathetically. You're lucky Winter found you. She knows these mountains better than anyone. Kyle's gaze flicked to me. I'm starting to realize that. Something in his tone made my pulse quicken. Not the fake researcher tone. Something deeper underneath it that Alice couldn't hear but made my skin prickle with awareness. Well, you're in good hands. Alice sipped her coffee. Winter's patched up everything from injured bears to sick eagles. A banged-up researcher should be easy work. I appreciate the help, Kyle said. Both of you. But his eyes stayed on me while he spoke, and I could see the real Kyle underneath the performance. The pack alpha who'd figured out my secrets in 3 days. The dangerous man who'd been poisoned by his enemies and lived to tell about it. The man whose steady gaze made me feel exposed and protected all at once. Alice chatted with him for a few more minutes about his supposed research, and Kyle played the part perfectly. Knowledgeable, but not threatening. Grateful, but not overly familiar. Everything a harmless wildlife researcher should be. But I could feel the deception like a weight in my chest. Every lie, every carefully crafted response. Alice trusted me completely, had for 3 years, and now was using that trust to hide a pack alpha whose very presence could bring the kind of trouble I'd spent 3 years avoiding. When Alice finally headed to her office to start the day's paperwork, Kyle and I were left alone again. The easy researcher mask slipped away, revealing the intensity underneath. Nicely done, I said quietly. You too. His amber eyes held mine. But you're worried. I don't like lying to her. Sometimes lying keeps people safe. I knew he was right. But as Kyle's gaze lingered on my face, I couldn't shake the feeling that the real danger wasn't the lies I was telling Alice. It was the truth I was starting to want to tell him. Over the next week, Kyle found reasons to stay. His injuries were healing faster than they should have. Alpha genetics, I figured. But he wasn't pushing to leave. Neither was I pushing him to go. Alice seemed content enough with his researcher story, especially when he started helping with some of the heavier work around the compound. Moving feed sacks, reinforcing fence posts, stuff that usually left me sore for days. I told myself it was practical. Extra hands were always useful. But that wasn't why I kept finding excuses to check on him. The conversation started small. How was he feeling? Did he need anything? Basic caretaker stuff. Then they got longer, deeper, the kind of talks I hadn't had with anyone in years. He'd sit on the back porch of the main building while I did evening rounds, and somehow I'd end up perched on the railing beside him, watching the sun disappear behind the peaks. We'd talk about everything except what we both knew he really was. You ever think about what comes after this? He asked one evening, gesturing toward the enclosures where a red-tailed hawk was testing his newly healed wing. After what? The healing, the recovery, when they're ready to go back out there. I watched the hawk spread his wings, catching the last light. That's the whole point. They get their strength back. They get their freedom. Even when out there is dangerous? Something in his tone made me look at him. Those amber eyes were studying my face like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Especially then, I said. Wild things aren't meant to be caged, no matter how safe the cage is. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, what if they're not sure they remember how to be wild? The question hit deeper than it should have. I thought about my own years here, hiding behind routine and distance. They remember, it's not something you lose, not really. It just gets buried sometimes. Kyle nodded slowly. Under what? Fear, hurt. The idea that staying small and quiet is safer than taking up space. And you think that's wrong. I met his gaze. I think being afraid to live isn't really living at all. That's when the conversations really opened up. Kyle started telling me things I'd spent 3 years avoiding thinking about. Pack dynamics, territory disputes, the constant pressure of leadership, the weight of making decisions that affected hundreds of lives. People think being alpha means getting what you want, he said one night, while we watched a family of raccoons raid the compost bin. They don't see the part where every choice you make ripples out to everyone under your protection, where being wrong doesn't just hurt you, it hurts your people. Sounds lonely? It is. He glanced at me. You learn not to show weakness, not to admit when you're unsure, because the moment you do, someone's waiting to challenge you for it. I understood that. Different context, but I understood it. Is that why you were out there alone? When you got poisoned? His jaw tightened. Politics. Someone wanted me gone, but they couldn't challenge me directly. Poison's a coward's weapon, but it's effective. Your own pack? Rival pack. We've been negotiating boundaries. Some negotiations go better than others. The way he said it made my stomach tighten. Negotiating probably meant a lot of blood and territory fights, the kind of pack politics I'd walked away from. But instead of pulling back, I found myself leaning in, asking questions, learning about the world I'd turned my back on. Kyle never pushed, never asked about my own past, my own reasons for being here. He just listened when I talked about the animals, about finding purpose in healing things that couldn't heal themselves. There's something peaceful about it, I told him. Watching him help me change the dressing on a coyote's injured leg. The animal stayed calm under his touch, in a way that should have surprised me but didn't. No judgment, no politics, just need and the ability to help. You don't think they judge. I considered that, watching the coyote's ears track our movements. They judge whether you're a threat, whether you're safe. But they don't care about your past, your mistakes, your status. They just care about whether you're going to help or hurt them in this moment. Must be nice. It is. I caught his eye. Everyone deserves that chance. To be judged on who they are right now, not who they used to be. Kyle's expression softened. Even alphas who've made enemies. Those conversations were dangerous. I could feel myself getting pulled back toward a world I'd sworn off. But Kyle made it sound different. Made leadership sound like responsibility instead of domination. Made pack life sound like protection instead of control. I was starting to trust him, starting to let my guard down, which is probably why I wasn't paying enough attention to other things. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning. I was cleaning out the flight cages when Alice found me, her expression tight. "We've got visitors," she said. 2 men at the front gate. They're asking about trespassers. My blood went cold. What kind of trespassers? They claim someone's been crossing through their territory, want to search the grounds. I followed Alice to the main office, where I could see 2 figures through the window, one tall and lean, one shorter and stocky, both dressed in dark clothing that looked more tactical than casual. The tall one was doing the talking. Sandy blonde hair, pale skin, the kind of sharp features that belonged on someone used to getting his way. His partner stood slightly behind him, silent and watchful. I knew what they were before I even caught their scent. Hunters, professional ones. They say their names are Brett Day and Wade Ortiz, Alice said. Claim they're with some private security company, have credentials and everything. My mouth went dry. These weren't random pack scouts checking boundaries. These were the kind of shifters you called when you wanted someone disappeared permanently. And they were here looking for Kyle. I could smell his scent on them, faint but unmistakable. They'd been tracking him, following his trail from wherever he'd been poisoned, through the mountains, right to our front door. Winter, Alice was studying my expression. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. I forced my voice to stay steady. Where's our researcher friend? Kyle? He's out back helping with the fence repairs. Why? Because those men outside weren't here to investigate trespassing. They were here to finish a job that had started with poison and was supposed to end with Kyle's body rotting somewhere in the wilderness. And now they'd found him. I could see it in Kyle's eyes. The frustration of being trapped in a body that wasn't responding the way it should. His hands were steady enough, but there was a tremor in his shoulders when he moved, the kind of weakness that went bone deep. He tried to stand when I came back from checking the perimeter, and I watched him catch himself against the medical table. Not obvious unless you knew what to look for, but I'd spent 3 years watching injured predators push past their limits, and Kyle was doing exactly that. You can't shift, I said. Wasn't a question. His jaw tightened. Not safely, not at full strength, which meant he couldn't fight, couldn't run, couldn't do any of the things an alpha relied on when cornered. That's when the decision hit me like a slap. Simple and terrifying and completely insane. I moved toward the control panel mounted near the medical bay's entrance. The emergency protocols were supposed to be for natural disasters, fires, flash floods, the kind of thing that meant releasing everything we couldn't evacuate in time. Winter, what are you doing? My fingers found the red switch under its protective cover. Something stupid. The alarm started the second I flipped it. Not the gentle warning tone we used for routine procedures, but the harsh cycling wail that meant all bets were off. Emergency lights kicked on throughout the facility, bathing everything in that stark amber glow. And then the electronic locks disengaged. All of them, every enclosure, every rehabilitation pen, every temporary holding area where we kept animals ready for release. 43 wolves, ranging from juveniles to full adults, all suddenly free to follow their instincts. Kyle stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. The chaos will give us cover, I said, already grabbing my jacket and the emergency pack I kept stocked. They can't track us if they're dealing with a dozen territorial wolves. The first howls started within seconds. Confused at first, then building into something that made my spine tingle. I'd heard individual wolves before, plenty of them, but this was a pack song, wild and immediate and absolutely uncontrolled. You released them all. Every damn one. I shouldered the pack, checking that Kyle could move well enough to follow. Can you run? He tested his weight, grimaced. I can manage. Good enough. The emergency exit led directly into the forest, bypassing the main compound where Brett and Wade would be trying to make sense of the suddenly chaotic situation. I could hear voices shouting over the alarm, confused and urgent. The cold hit us the second we stepped outside. January in the mountains, with snow crunching under our boots and the kind of air that burned your lungs. But it also carried scent, the musk of wolves spreading out through their temporary territory, marking and testing and doing exactly what I'd hoped they'd do, making it impossible to track two specific signatures through the mess. I led Kyle along the maintenance trail that curved behind the medical facility. 3 years of hiking these paths meant I knew every route, every loose stone, every place where the trail split off toward the deeper wilderness. My body moved automatically while my mind tried to catch up with what I'd just done. 43 wolves, months of rehabilitation work, undone in a single decision. But Kyle was alive and moving beside me, and that seemed to matter more than protocol. The trail climbed steadily for the first quarter mile, then dropped down into a ravine where the creek ran year-round. Even in winter, the water kept moving, cutting through ice and stone toward the valley below. I followed it upstream, away from the sanctuary and toward the network of caves I'd discovered during my second year. How well do you know this area? Kyle's voice was steady despite the pace I was setting. Well enough. I hopped across a fallen log, waiting for him to follow. There's a cave system about half a mile up. Animals use it during storms, which meant it would be dry, defensible, and hidden from anyone who didn't know exactly where to look. I'd spent plenty of afternoons exploring those caves, mapping the passages that went deep enough to matter. The entrance was tucked behind a stand of pine trees, invisible unless you approached from exactly the right angle. I'd marked it years ago with a small cairn, 3 stones stacked in a way that looked natural, but told me where to find the opening. Inside, the temperature stayed constant, cold, but not the bone-deep freeze of the outside air. The main chamber was large enough for both of us, with a sandy floor and walls that curved up into darkness. I pulled out the small LED lantern from my pack, setting it to its lowest setting. Enough light to see, not enough to carry far if anyone was tracking us. Kyle settled against the far wall with a careful movement that told me his ribs were still bothering him, but he was here, breathing, alive. Now what? I asked. That's when he told me the rest of it. The poisoning wasn't random, he said. His voice carried differently in the enclosed space, quieter but somehow more intense. It was coordinated, planned. I'd suspected as much, but hearing him confirm it made my stomach drop. Someone wants your territory. Someone wants me dead so they can claim my territory. There's a difference. He leaned his head back against the stone. Pack politics aren't like human politics. You can't just vote someone out. You have to eliminate them. The way he said eliminate made it clear we weren't talking about exile. So by helping you, you've put yourself in the middle of a war. His amber eyes met mine in the lantern light. I'm sorry, I never meant for that to happen. But there was something else in his expression, something that made me think the political situation wasn't the only thing he needed to tell me. Kyle? He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, uncertain in a way I hadn't heard before. While I was unconscious, I had dreams, visions maybe. I don't know what to call them. He looked up at me. There was a scent that surrounded me the whole time I was healing, familiar but impossible to place. And in the dreams, I could see. He stopped, shook his head. See what? A mate bond forming. The words came out quiet, almost reluctant. With whoever that scent belonged to. The cave suddenly felt smaller, warmer. I could hear my own heartbeat in the silence that followed. Mate bonds don't form with unconscious alphas, I said, which was true as far as I knew. No, they don't. Kyle's gaze held mine. Unless the other person is already... He didn't finish the sentence, didn't need to, because I could smell it too, now that we were alone in this small space. The same scent that had surrounded him for 3 days while I'd worked to keep him alive. The same scent that was definitely, unmistakably mine. The truth hit me like a freight train derailing in slow motion. I'd read about mate bonds in the old texts Alice kept locked away in her office. Clinical descriptions of pheromone matching and biological imperatives. Dry academic language that made it sound like chemistry homework, instead of the gut-punch reality sitting 3 feet away from me in a mountain cave. But there wasn't any mistaking what was happening to my body, the way my pulse hammered whenever Kyle moved. How his scent had wrapped around my lungs and decided to make itself at home. The constant hum under my skin that felt like standing too close to power lines. 3 years of careful distance. 3 years of keeping my omega nature buried so deep I'd almost convinced myself it didn't matter. And now my biology was staging a full-scale rebellion because I'd spent a week nursing an injured alpha back to health. Winter. Kyle's voice cut through the spiral of panic building in my chest. Look at me. I couldn't. My hands were shaking, and I pressed them against my thighs to hide it. The cave suddenly felt too small, too warm, like the walls were closing in around us. This isn't supposed to happen, I whispered. I've been careful. I've always been so damn careful. The laugh that escaped me sounded bitter, even to my own ears. 26 years old, and I'd never felt anything stronger than mild attraction to anyone. had started thinking maybe I was broken somehow, that whatever gene was supposed to make omegas go weak-kneed around alphas had skipped right over me. Turns out I just hadn't met the right alpha yet. Kyle shifted closer, and my treacherous body responded like he'd touched a live wire to my spine. Every nerve ending lit up at once. The logical part of my brain knew this was just biology. Pheromones and genetic compatibility playing out their ancient dance. The rest of me didn't give a damn about logic. Winter. His voice was gentler now, patient. I need you to listen to me. I forced myself to meet his eyes. Those amber depths that had been haunting my sleep for the past week. They held understanding now, recognition. How long? I managed to ask. Since the second day. Kyle's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. When you fell asleep in the chair next to my bed. I woke up and you were right there, and it was like someone had flipped a switch. The memory hit me hard. How I'd startled awake to find him watching me. The strange tension that had filled the air between us. I'd chalked it up to normal awkwardness about personal space. Should have known better. This complicates things, Kyle said, and the understatement was so massive I almost laughed again. Complicated didn't begin to cover it. I was a nobody omega who spent her days bandaging injured owls. He was clearly from some kind of alpha bloodline with political enemies and pack responsibilities. I couldn't even begin to understand. It doesn't have to, I said, hating how my voice shook. I can leave, change my name again, find another sanctuary somewhere else. This doesn't have to affect your life. Kyle went very still. The kind of stillness that predators used right before they struck. Is that what you want? The question hung between us like a blade, sharp and impossible to ignore. What I wanted was to keep pretending this wasn't happening, to go back to my simple life of medical charts and feeding schedules, to never have to explain to anyone why a perfectly healthy omega had spent 3 years hiding in the mountains instead of finding a pack to join. What I wanted was impossible. It doesn't matter what I want, I said. Look at us, Kyle. Really look. You're an alpha with enemies who use poison and send scouts to finish the job. I'm a sanctuary worker who's been hiding from my own nature for 3 years. How exactly do you think this ends well? He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried that unmistakable note of command that made my spine straighten without conscious thought. Let me tell you what I see, he said. I see an omega who spent a week keeping me alive when the smart thing would have been to call the authorities and let them deal with it. I see someone who's built a life around healing things the world has given up on. My throat tightened. I see someone strong enough to make her own choices instead of letting biology make them for her. Kyle leaned forward, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off his skin. Close enough that his scent filled my lungs with every breath. The pack I'm supposed to inherit is broken, he said quietly. Half the members are dead or scattered. The other half don't trust anyone enough to come out of hiding. Traditional alpha leadership got them into this mess. Maybe it's time to try something different. I stared at him. Different how? The same way you run this place. Kyle gestured toward the cave entrance. Offer sanctuary to anyone who needs it. Build something based on trust instead of dominance. Give second chances to the ones everyone else has written off. The idea hit me like a physical blow. Everything I'd built here, everything I'd learned about healing and trust and patience, but applied to people instead of animals. You're talking about rebuilding from nothing, I said. Not nothing. Kyle's gaze never wavered. I'd have you. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with possibility and terror in equal measure. I could feel the bond pulling at something deep in my chest, whispering that this was right. This was what I'd been waiting for without knowing it. But I'd spent 3 years learning that wanting something and being able to have it were two very different things. Those scouts who came looking for you, I said, they won't just give up. No, they won't. Kyle's expression darkened, which means I need to be smart about how I handle this, and I need people I can trust absolutely. The weight of that trust settled on my shoulders like a lead blanket. He was asking me to step into a world I'd spent years running from, to take risks I'd sworn I'd never take again. If I do this, I said slowly, if I leave with you, there's no going back. Alice will never forgive me for disappearing without explanation. This place will lose its only medic. Alice is stronger than you think, Kyle said. And there are other medics, but there's only one you. I closed my eyes, trying to think past the biological imperative that was screaming at me to say yes, to trust him, to leap into the unknown because an alpha I'd known for a week thought we could build something better together. When I opened them again, Kyle was still watching me with that steady patience I'd seen him use with the more skittish animals, like he understood that pushing would only make me bold. The scent of pine drifted in through the cave entrance, the same scent that had surrounded me for 3 years, while I'd learned to trust my own instincts, while I'd discovered that sometimes the most broken things could heal stronger than they'd ever been before. Maybe that applied to people too. Maybe it applied to me. Okay, I whispered, and felt the word change everything. Okay, I'll do it. The smile that spread across Kyle's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, bright and warm and full of promise. You won't regret this, he said. I wasn't sure about that. But as I looked around the cave that had sheltered countless injured creatures over the years, I realized I was tired of being afraid, tired of hiding from my own nature, tired of pretending that safety was the same thing as living. Kyle held out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, I took it. His fingers were warm and calloused and steady, everything I'd never let myself hope for. So what happens now, I asked. Now we figure out how to save a pack, Kyle said. Together. The bond hummed between us, no longer fighting against, but flowing with the current of possibility, and for the first time in 3 years, I let myself believe that maybe running toward something could be just as powerful as running away.